Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 3rd of December. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we're going to start with the Kupiansk frontline, Kupiansk-Liman frontline. Today during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of updates from this area, a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. If you take a look at this map first, I believe that you won't see the changes or something like this. And if we take a look at the Russian sources map, as you can see, there are no updates on this front line at all. This map shows the same situation. According to the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians tried to attack in direction of Kuzyomovka. If we're talking about Liman front line, the Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Kolymychyha, this one, and in direction of Zhitlovka, this one. As a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost around 90 soldiers, something around 14 armored vehicles. All those attacks were repulsed, as you can see, the story is the same as we saw yesterday, the day before yesterday, maybe a month ago. So the Ukrainians are trying to attack along this front line, but all their attacks were repulsed by the Russians. But there is an important thing about the situation. Yesterday in the evening, very late in the evening, maybe somewhere at 11 p.m. of local time, we got the first update from Liman frontline, from Kremenna frontline to be more precise. And the Russians noted, a lot of Russian military experts, soldiers, officers from on the ground from this area, reported that that day, the previous 24 hours, were pretty successful for the Ukrainians. And as a result of their attacks, of the Ukrainian attacks, they managed to penetrate the Russian defense orders, and the Ukrainians managed to enter Chervonopopovka, this town. So the Russians reported that Ukrainians managed to enter to establish control over, let's say, western part, or I don't know, so some part that located more close to the Ukrainians were taken by the Ukrainians. As you can see, the Russians has been updated their map, like they have changed the front line, and as you can see now, the Ukrainians tries to attack in direction of Zhitlovka, and this very close to Kremenna. Situation is very critical, believe me. And if we take a look at the Western sources map, we're gonna see that the Western source map has been updated, and according to this information, entire Chervonopopovka from now on is under Ukrainian control, or at least is in the gray zone, because the blue cloud means that Ukrainians got like real 100% control, and everything that is between the red and blue cloud, like without color, means that now this area is in the gray zone. So as you can see, the entire Chervonopopovka from now on is in the gray zone, and the Russians reported that Ukrainians managed to enter this town. From that moment, we haven't received any updates about the Russian progress, or if they managed to counterattack and return control over this area. But anyway, from now on, we understand that the road that connected Rubizhnoye, Kremenna, Privolye, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk agglomeration, all these towns, there's road R66 that connected this agglomeration with Svatova is now from now on is under real fire control, and I believe that this road is also under physical control. As you can see, this situation happened, and the Ukrainians were very successful as soon as they moved their 45th Artillery Brigade. I believe that now they have some progress, some power, at least some heavy power in their artillery, and that played a very big role in this offensive operation. And now we can say that this front line has been changed, the configuration of this front line has been changed, and we will discuss the new reality for the Russians in this area. This road R66 was and still very important for the Russians, and the main thing is that if we take a look at this map, and let's say we're going to say that there is, let's say, a Severodonetsk agglomeration, and let's say Svatova agglomeration, like town from Nizhny Duvonka to Krasnorechska. These two defense areas that the Russians try to defend, and the Russians from their side are split this area in two parts. They're saying Liman front line for the Russians, meaning the area between Liman and Kremenna in Severodonetsk agglomeration. And if the Russians are talking about Kupiansk front line, they're saying about the area the Russians near Svatova. So this is two front lines. And the thing is that before the Ukrainians established control over Chervona-Popovka, these two front lines were connected by the road R66. And as you can see, the distance between, let's say, Kremenna and Krasnoyarsk is around 20 kilometers. If we calculate the road like using the roads, it's around 25 kilometers using the road. So these towns were very close to each other, and the Russians has nice possibilities to be mobile with the reserves, to move their forces between two towns, to have. So that was pretty successful, and this configuration was pretty good for the Russians. But now the Ukrainians, I believe that they established fire control or maybe some physical control over this road, and at least maybe the Ukrainians were pushed back and the Russians returned control. For now, there are no updates. But anyway, I believe that it's too dangerous to use this road for supply and support of Krasnoyarsk or to have some communications between these two front lines. And if we try to analyze and understand where is where is the another way how to do this, how the Russians can move their forces if it necessary from Kremenna or Privolia Rubizhная to Svatova or Krasnoyarsk, and as we can see according to this map, there is no more roads that connect these two towns, and the only way how to do this is to make us this small hook. And just with help of this, the distance between these two areas was around 20 kilometers, and now the distance between these two areas is around 60 kilometers. And the most important one, that there is just one cross, this cross, that the Russians have to move their forces from Severodonetsk agglomeration to, let's say, Svatova front line. And now the Western countries understand that this cross plays significant role in this operation. The only thing they need to do for the Ukrainians is to establish some control over this area. Of course, the distance is very big, but they have HIMARS for these purposes. And if the Western countries in Ukraine are able to establish fire control over this cross, of course, the Russians will have more problems than they have right now. Now, these days, very important role plays a town by the name of Starobelsk, because from now on, the Russians need to have their logistic through this town. If before that happened, the Ukraine established control of the road, the Russians could stretch their warehouses along this line and to be flexible and mobile. Now the Russians need to have their strategic reserves, strategic ammo shell in this town, and from this town they need to supply this area and this area as well. So their logistic, the possibilities and capability of the Russian logistic has been reduced by the fact that the Ukrainians got control over the road R66. A lot of sources before were projected this situation that the Ukrainians will try to encircle, but from this perspective, I don't agree with this, because it's highly unlikely that Ukrainians will try to attack in these directions. The reason is the same. There are no roads in this area. Anyway, if the Ukrainians want to attack, they need to stick to the road, to the main arteria. Why the Ukrainians attacks in direction of Svatova? Because if they take control of Svatova, they open the door to this road, M26, that connects Svatova and Starobelsk. And if Ukrainians continue developing their offensive operation in this area, they will be able to attack the towns along this road and to take them. So this is much more easy than to attack using the fields and so on. So this is the reason why the Ukrainians won't attack or encircle, let's say, Lysychansk, Severodonetsk agglomeration. If they want to do this, anyway, they need to attack from Svatova in direction of Starobelsk, and then from Starobelsk in direction of Novaydar. So if the Ukrainians want to encircle Lysychansk agglomeration, the only way to do this is to take Svatova, Starobelsk, Novaydar. So along the road. Anyway, along the road, I don't believe that Ukrainians will try to do this along fields and rivers and so on. If we're talking about Svatova, Svatova is still under Russian control. There are still heavy clashes around the same towns, as we discussed before, near Kolymychiha and near Novoselska-Kuzyumovka. The Russians still there. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians control over Novoselska, but because of the fact that the Russians lost Chervona-Popovka, or the situation is critical there, I'm not sure that the Russians are able to hold these towns as well, and maybe they will be forced to step back, because sooner or later these towns will be reduced to ruins, and there would be no places even to hide or to have their position. So it's like, from logical perspective, they will be forced to step back towards a more reliable position, or at least towards a town that still exists and where the Russians are able to have their fire position, the position where they can hide their forces and so on, their armored vehicles and so on. So we can say that the Ukrainians have activated their movements on the LPR front line, and these days we are going to see the beginning or continue of their offensive operation in direction of Starobelsk through Svatova, Kremina. I'm not sure that Ukrainians will try to take control or storm Kremina, but anyway, everything is possible these days. So we'll see and let's follow this situation. If we are talking about front line between Bilogorovka, Seversk and Bakhmut, the Russians reported that Ukrainians made a lot of attempts of their counteroffensive operation. They were trying to return control over Kurdyumovka, over Andreevka. So they made counteroffensive operation, more reserves. The Ukrainians sent more reserves to this area. They, let's say, now they have some, not free, but at least some forces to use. And they made these counteroffensive operations. All those attacks, according to the Russians, were repulsed. The Russians always say that all the attacks were repulsed, but then they're losing sometimes. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost around 60 soldiers and around 7 armored vehicles. Anyway, we can say that Kurdyumovka, Azaryanovka, Mayorsk, Andreevka are still under the Russians. There are very heavy clashes in Opotne. Today, during the day, we got some updates that Ukrainians made a decision to leave Bakhmut, but it's not true. There are still heavy clashes. The Ukrainians are not planning to give up and to step back. The Russians are not planning to do the same as well. We're like the witnesses of the final battle of this year. I'm not sure that the battle for Bakhmut is going to be completed by the end of this year. I believe that if the Russians are able to take control, maybe somewhere in January they will be able to do it. If nothing extraordinary happens, but the battle is going to take up to 2 or maybe 3 months before this territory will be completely taken by the Russians. If we are talking about Donetsk front line, as you can see, Donetsk is under heavy fire. As we discussed yesterday, the Ukrainians moved more artillery to this sector, and to tell the truth, the intensivity of shelling of Donetsk has been increased since that moment. Today we got more and more pictures of killed civilians in this town. A lot of losses among civilians, so the situation is not good. But if we're talking about the Ukrainians, they managed to move some reserve to this front line, and the Ukrainians made a few attempts by attacking the Russians on the Donetsk Ring Road. This is some kind of big road, and there are a lot of bridges along the road, and there are a lot of fortifications under the bridges. And this map is not updated, but according to the last Russian report we have, entire road is under Russian control. Maybe just there is one place that's still under Ukrainians. These small fortifications between Opotne and Spartak and Mineralne, between these areas, and the Ukrainians were trying to attack from Avdiivka. They were trying to return control over Vodiane, but all those attacks were repulsed, and the Ukrainians lost around 60 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. There are heavy clashes in the South Donetsk front line. There are very heavy clashes in Marinka. The Russians got control over some residential area in the south, and over this fortification area the Ukrainians made a few counteroffensive operations in this area, but all their attacks were repulsed. The same situation is around Ugledar. The Ukrainians were attacking in the direction of Solotkaya, Novomayorskaya, Shevchenkova. All those attacks were repulsed, and the Ukrainians lost around 40 soldiers, something around 7 armored vehicles. So the front line has been activated, as you can see, and I believe that during the day you saw a lot of reports about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Today the head of IAEA organization reported that he had conversation with the Russians and with the Ukrainians, and today he gave us some draft about the upcoming big deal between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And as a result, as a main goal of those negotiations is that Zaporozhye power plant should be demilitarized area. But the main thing is that I read those notes, those articles about this agreement, and as I understood, according to this agreement, only armored vehicles and heavy vehicles will be moved from this power plant. As I understand, the Russians will be allowed to keep there some police forces, militia forces, so light infantry, we can say, without tanks, without armored vehicles, without artillery. In this case, the Ukrainians won't attack this area, and the Russians as well won't attack Ukrainians from the territory of the power plant. And I believe that there is another important agreement that who is going to control this power plant, and will this power plant supply Ukraine with electricity. So these three main points, but anyway, I believe that by the end of this year, I believe that we're going to see the implementation of this deal, as we discussed many times in the past about the big deal between Ukraine and Russian Federation, about Kherson, about power plant. The Russians understand that they don't want to return control of this power plant because of the question of the dirty bomb, but I believe they agree to move their heavy vehicles, heavy tanks from this area on the safe distance, but they will keep the militia forces, light infantry, and the only thing the Russians need is to have guarantees from Ukraine that they won't do any attempts of crossing Dnipro and taking over this power plant like a part of breaking deal, because in this case, it will be very difficult for the Russians to return control over this power plant. And who is going to control? If EIA organization, this one situation; if Ukrainians, this is another situation. So for now, a lot of there is a fog of war, but I believe that by the end of this year, this situation will be resolved. And as far as I understand, if we are talking about Kherson area, the Russians returned control over this area, and this is what Ukrainians got from this deal, and the Russians got all their ports and their grain, and a lot of things that they produce were unblocked, and the Russians were allowed to trade with these goods. And if we're talking about Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, if the Russians return control and start supplying support to Ukraine with electricity, they will be allowed to transport gas and oil through Ukraine in direction of Europe without they will have stable transit through Ukraine without any problems. But we know that there are a lot of problems with the price for oil, and but it's not concern the oil that moves along the pipelines, just according to the sea trade. So a lot of questions. Everybody wants to of course to get as much as possible from these deals, so we'll see. But anyway, before the new year comes, we're going to see a lot of very interesting updates, at least on the Svatovo front line. I believe that Ukrainians will continue developing their situation. If we're talking about Bakhmut, Konstantinivka, these front lines, I'm not sure that the next 2 weeks we're going to see a lot of updates, because the next 2 weeks is going to be a process of the, let's say, reducing of enemy's armies. Both sides will try to reduce without any progress on the ground. And maybe by the end of this year, we're going to see some progress in Marinka, because the Russians says that they got a lot of success, a lot of progress. The Ukrainians have already lost Marinka, and the only thing that Ukrainians do is just they're winning time, and they're losing their soldiers, and of course they try to reduce the Russian soldiers as well. But they have lost the battle for Marinka. This is just a question of time, but not the question of the town and control over this town. So this is that the Russians says about this situation. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.